particularly when I'm talking to therapists who are kind of exploring neurofeedback systems, um,
Right.
trying to figure out what's a good fit for them. Although sometimes it's like consumers who again are just like trying to understand what's going to be good for their whatever they're trying to work on. They ask
Right.
about the lens system.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I thought it would be helpful to, have you talk a little bit about the lens system as you know it,
Right.
and how it's different from neurooptimal, because as you
Mm-hmm.
know, like the umbrella of neurofeedback is so big that people get very confused and they just assume like all systems are basically the same because they're all neurofeedback. So
They're all called neurofeedback.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So any kind of light you can shed on understanding the difference between the two, I think would be super helpful for people.
Sure. Sure. LENS actually stands for Low Energy Neurofeedback System, but it was also a play on the name of the gentleman who developed it, Len Ox. And Len was a good friend during the early days, kind of the pioneer community. Had a lot of back and forth and this sort of thing. And it was just fun. We'd go to the conferences and share and talk and disagree or agree as it turned out, just kind of have fun. uh, and Len was always very interested in how to kind of time compress what was going on. And so it's a funny thing, but you're right, so many different systems kind of get loosely lumped into neurofeedback. And many of them, I think it's not quite the right terminology. It's more like neurotechnology. And the lens system is a good example of that. When I think of neurofeedback, I think of like biofeedback. Okay. For me, it's continuously monitoring some psychophysiological parameter of the body and feeding it back in real time. Otherwise, it's not a feedback process, really. And what distinguishes the lens system, among a number of other things, is that a session is just a couple of minutes long. Because what happens is there's a modified kind of QEEG that's done. It's a very truncated one to find out what location, in from their perspective, and what dominant frequency is being observed in that session. And then the system is oriented towards that location, sensors placed appropriately depending on what the location is. And signal is actually injected into the individual, which is an entrainment signal that dances above and below that dominant frequency. Now, there have been a lot of permutations and modifications over the years with this, but the whole idea is that the energy that is injected, if you will, is in the picovolt range. So it's from their perspective, it's impossible to feel directly. Now, he and I had a lot of discussions about those sorts of things. And of course, what's primarily different, there are several things that are primarily different between lens and neuroptimal. Number one is nothing is injected. There's no signal that goes into the brain or into the skull or into the client in any way in neuroptimal. It's just reading what's occurring. So that's a big thing. Another one is we're diagnostically agnostic. So there's no sense of what's the dominant frequency, how do we kind of disturb that, perturb that so that the system renormalizes, and it's kind of a chaotic perturbation on the side of the head, depends how much it's done. Um, and as many of the practitioners who've utilized the system say, um, I've had some of the most dramatic wins of my career with LENS, and I've had some of the worst unmitigated disasters using it.
And what
So
typically is it used for? Is it used in the same way as NeuroOptimal is in terms of helping the brain to renormalize, re-regulate, or are they very much targeting specific conditions?
they're targeting specific conditions, but in terms of what that dominant frequency is on each session. So it's kind of like, okay, you've got this condition. We anticipate this is what's going to happen. Oh, look, it's different than what we anticipated. I wonder why that is. Well, let's try to loosen it up a bit. There's a lot of sense in that community that goes along with the kind of language that Chuck Davis developed. He was the Roshi and P. Roshi guy, and his jargon was that he was disentraining the brain because the brain will get stuck in a certain frequency range or several of them, and so it's kind of in a parking orbit, and you have to get it out of there. Now, the problem is disentrainment is definitely an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. So you can't really disentrain. You have to use entrainment or chaotic perturbation to break up the entrainment that's already there.
And
So it was
can
just
you
a
just
jargon.
can you just briefly define those two terms? Because I don't think people would be familiar with them.
Which two terms?
Well, the dis
Dis disentrainment.
yeah, or
Okay.
entrainment.
Or entrainment, yes. Entrainment is what many systems do that use audio-visual inputs. So it's the Mozart effect was one way that was talked about a number of years ago, where you play a certain kind of music to induce that state. So you use calming music so that people calm down, and the idea is that the brain will start to follow that rhythm pattern, that particular frequency pattern, whatever it is, and then move into that state. Of course, part of the premise there is the belief in states, and that there's a relaxed state, and there's an energetic state, and there's a sleep state, and this kind of thing, which is really not a very good way to think about it. So disentrainment would be to break up, to perturb, to disturb the pattern of entrainment that's happening. So one way to think about the moon circling the Earth as the Earth moves through the solar system, as the solar system moves through the galaxy, all of that, is that the moon is kind of entrained to Earth, right? So it's always doing the same kind of thing, but there's differences. But we can predict the eclipses, we can predict the phases of the moon, we can predict tidal behavior in the waters on the planet, and that's all entrainment effects, right? If we didn't have the moon, you wouldn't have tides. It'd be very different. So, and chaotic perturbation is it's like the Fonzie character in Happy Days when he'd go up to the jukebox and he'd just hit it the right way and song would play, right? It's you do this random event that sets everything right, right? That creates the effect that you want. And the problem with chaotic perturbation is that you don't know what the effect is until after you've done that creative whack on the side of the head. As one of the peak performing gurus used to talk about it. You get out of your stuck thinking by doing a creative whack on the side of the head. Just totally think something different. And okay, it's an idea, but you never know where it's going to go, is the problem.
And so that's part of what the design is behind the LENS system, is that we're giving some whack on the side of the head, so to speak.
Correct. And the whack is tied to what is observed as the dominant frequency in particular regions at that particular time in that session. The idea being to just kick the brain out of that entrainment pocket that's not as useful. That the thinking is that's what is causing or perpetuating or extending whatever the diagnosed problems are.
And so now to just contrast that with kind of how Neurooptimal is designed to help the brain get out of maladaptive patterns, how would you describe
Right.
that difference?
Well, the difference is, I know I use this image a lot, but it's like the rumble strips on the highway.
Mhm.
You know, if you did the kind of creative whack on the side of the head, if you really did a chaotic perturbation with those rumbles, they'd be like running over the curb, right? And they'd induce like a huge change in the car. That's not a good idea in general. If the car's going at like 60 miles an hour and you hit the curb, not good things are going to happen. Right. So what Neuroptimal is doing is basically just saying, here's where you are. It's not saying go somewhere else, right? Because if you want to stay on the road and you go to the rumble strip on the side and your tires are kind of, you know, giving you that feedback, you go, oh, okay, I need to come back to the center of the lane. On the other hand, if you're tired and you want to pull over and take a little bit of a rest, or there's a scenic lookout and you want to stop so you can get out and see the beautiful view of the ocean or the mountains or whatever it is, you would keep going in that direction. It's just information. It's not intended to have any particular impact, whereas entrainment is definitely intended to have an impact. So if you entrain alpha rhythm, or at least this is the thinking, then you should be seeing a more dominant signature of alpha wave in the brain.
And what let's take being anxious as the example,
Sure,
try to make it a little bit more in people's experience, right? So I'm coming
sure.
to neurofeedback, or I'm thinking about doing neurofeedback because I'm an anxious person, and I'm thinking maybe
Right.
brain training will help, right? And there's the lens system, and I
Hmm.
could go do that, or I could do neurooptimal. And I'm like, I don't know what's going to help my anxiety the most, right? Just speaking very sort of practically.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, you know, Neuroptimal isn't a treatment, and so it's training. And so I always have to keep that in mind when it's like, well, what helps the most? It's
Mhm.
an individual journey for everyone. So it's difficult to say ahead of time to predict. But that having been said, the thinking about from a lens perspective of how come you're anxious is because your brain is predominantly in certain range of frequencies. So 23 to 38 hertz, the sort of dredging, mulling, hypervigilance. You're always looking for what's wrong in the environment, that sort of thing. And what the intervention attempts to do is disrupt that, because it's like you're in that parking zone. So it's disrupting that so that then your attention can move more fluidly throughout the world. That's the thinking. Um, from a neuroptimal point of view, it's pointing out that you're running on the rumble strips by the side of the road. Is that really what you want to do? And so it's always a choice point based on information as opposed to desired outcome based on the belief system, based on the understanding of the practitioner as to what would be best. From our perspective, each individual's brain is the real master, if you will, of the situation. It it was able to learn to walk, to breathe, to digest food, to interact, to talk, to understand. That's pretty impressive stuff. if the brain can do that, if it's given information like it was when it learned to talk and walk, it can write itself. Neuroptimal just gives it that information in a faster, more definitive format than usually happens in daily living.
So then that unconscious brain now has the kind of opportunity to be aware that, oh, I wasn't aware before that I was on the rumble strip, right? Which we could say was
Right.
producing the anxious manifestation. And
Yes.
now I'm aware, what do I want to do with this information? Is this really
Correct.
helping
Correct.
me, right? And that's the, you know, I think part of what is important for people to understand is the brain is trying to create some outcome, help some
That's right.
by what it's producing, but that it goes into those unconscious habitual patterns and doesn't recognize that the here and now perhaps requires something different than that, hyper arousal energy that's great if we're in immediate
Right.
danger, right? But if we're trying to have a
Right.
conversation with our spouse, right, it's like highly distracting and doesn't help.
Well, it's also that if you're having a conversation with your spouse and you're in that kind of state, if you will, you're going to be looking for what's wrong.
Yes.
And that usually means that you're going to find out more of what's wrong, right? Which is generally not the most useful way to have that conversation. You generally want to look at what's working, and what's better, what would help. When I used to do a lot of work with couples, they'd always want to talk about the problem, or the problems, depending on their particular variety. And I'd say, I know, we'll get to all that, but really what I want to know is, like, how did you guys decide to get together? Right? Because almost always what's happened over time is they no longer do the things they did when they got together.
Mhm.
And if you do the things you did when you got together, maybe you'll get together again, right? you
Yeah.
know, and what about the problems? Well, if you do the solutions, the problems may take care of themselves. You know, so it's a way that the brain is wonderfully organized to detect difference and minimize its discomfort. And so these survival strategies that were developed, sometimes in traumatizing situations, sometimes not, they worked. If they didn't work, you wouldn't be alive to have the problem you're having today. So from the brain's perspective, it's like, okay, I know what to do here, and can I do something else? Well, no, let me go with what I know. Right. So it's that whole thing of breathe out, let go, return to the present and see what's here, and realize the present is always a gift.
Terrific.
And there's a lot more to be celebrated in that gift than oh geez, well, I didn't get a big enough cup of Slurpee from 7-Eleven or whatever. Right. And that allows you to look around too and engage people who are with you, as opposed to just focusing on yourself, right?
Right. Right. Because
Because
when we're perceiving threat or danger, right, which basically anxiety is that mode, there is some threat I have to attend constantly, right? That just
right.
naturally makes this being very self-centered, right? Because this being is trying to stay alive. And so
That's exactly right. Yeah.
this system calms down, perceives the present moment more, perceives safety, and then that brain isn't so fixated on this and can orient towards, spontaneously what's going on with other.
And in and of itself, focusing outward, compassion as opposed to self-focus, already will decrease that anxiety.
Hmm. Terrific.
Connectedness is really what it's all about, or compassion, however you want to think about that. At core, we're all compassion. And the more you can just return to the present regardless, everything is possible.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Val, for explaining in a little more detail the difference between lens and neurooptimal, and also just going a little further into the bigger picture of, what we're capable of if we're able to
Yes,
a little bit better, meaning we're a little bit more oriented consciously and unconsciously in the present moment.
exactly. Yes. And that's, for me, that's what it's all about, is coming back to the present.
Great.
All right.
I'm sorry to kind of have to end so quickly,
Oh,
but
no.
so appreciate you giving your time and helping explain. Education is so helpful. So,
I thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm happy to help. So, let me know. We'll do more whenever it
okay,
makes sense.
great.
Okay.
Great,
Okay.
terrific. Yes, as
All
I
right.
as I
All
have
right.
all questions. All right. And
Sure. Okay.
I hope things go well with the surgeon. I'm really rooting for you being pain-free and cheering soon.
That's right. Being able to do the wave, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Talk to
Bye.
you later. Right. Bye.